find your notes?
Yeah. They both said that, how's that?
That's
We
okay.
said welcome people, but like, they pretty much just said, we should welcome the people coming, but enforce the law.
So they're asking, is there a
Yeah.
difference between your position on immigration and Mr. Berman?
I think that my position is that we need a new law. We need immigration reform. Okay, the way that immigration is being handled in America today is fundamentally broken. It's one of the reasons why, if you look at the number of undocumented immigrants in America today, so those are who are here without proper documentation. More than half of them, almost 60% of them, are what we call visa overstays. Right? That means they come here legally on a student visa or a temporary worker visa or something like that, and then they stay. And a lot of it is not because they ever had an ill intention. It's just because they came here, they fell in love, they had a baby, and for that reason, they want to stay in America. And so we need a process by which we can bring those folks through the immigration system. But one of the points that I did make is that it's very important when we talk about fixing immigration. The thing that Americans don't like is line cutters, right? Nobody likes a line cutter. If you've been standing in line at lunch and somebody slides in 3 people in front of you, you're not happy about that. And the same goes for immigration overall. If someone's in the country, they're undocumented, they either cross the border illegally or they're a visa overstay, we need to have a process, but they should not get in the line ahead of the people who are going through the legal process. And that's what, when we talk about immigration reform, you see a comprehensive legal reform bill. And dealing with those 11 million undocumented workers here is an important piece of it.
Is it really hard, we were talking about this because I don't know either, is it really hard to get in legally?
It is difficult to get in legally, but it depends.
Okay.
If you're a Chinese student who's going to school at Berkeley, it's pretty easy to get a student visa.
But then can you stay after that? And is it hard to be able to stay after that?
If you get hired by a local company, then the company sponsors you, and so the companies have a heavy role in being able to influence that. If you are hired by, let's say you're from Denmark, and you're an executive, and you're hired to come work at a heavy equipment manufacturer in America, it's very easy for you to get your visa to come here and do that, and it's very simple for your family to get the visa to come here and do that. And then once here, you and your family can enter the process to become citizens relatively quickly. It wouldn't be the same if you were, say, an electrician from Bangladesh. It would not be nearly as easily for you to, because you would have to find a job here first, and you have to get a company to sponsor you to come, and so it's really heavily weighted towards people with means, as opposed to what we used to be as America, which is people who want to leave and come to America to make a better life. And one of the things I would point out often is, I've been in areas of the world where there's people that are angry at America, at differing levels. People who've demonstrated in the streets and see riots and things on television. And I can promise you that if you were to set up a booth on the corner in the middle of that riot and put up a sign that says, America visas here, they'd all put down their signs and they get in line. Because everybody wants to come here. Even if they're angry with us, they want the opportunity that America represents.
I was wondering, what your thoughts were on the SULAC. That was
Okay, so in Congress, we have questions about the SULACs. And when we talk about how the government spends money, on things like infrastructure, there's 2 things that Congress has to do. Now, Congress has what we call the power of the purse. They control how the money is spent. They control how much money the U.S. government gets through taxation, and they control how we spend the money we get. And there's 2 things that you have to do as a congressional body to do that. In order for a contractor to show up at the SULACs with heavy equipment and start digging, you have to begin with what's called an authorization bill. Okay, and so you have to authorize the expenditure of a set amount of money for a certain purpose. And that's like you saying, I'm going to buy a new car, and we're going to agree that we're going to spend $32,000 on our new car. Doesn't mean that you have the money to do it yet. And that's why the next step that is required is called an appropriations bill. And that actually takes the money out of the U.S. Treasury isolates it and says, we are going to put this money from the Treasury into the budget, and then once the budget is appropriated, once that money is it's there in the budget, then the U.S. government then has the money to actually be able to spend it.
So if they never do that second step of
That's right.
assigning the money, it never gets done.
That's right.
Even
If
though we
you-
said we're gonna do it.
You don't put the money in the budget. You know, it's like saying, I'm going to buy a new car, and actually having the money to go buy a new car, finding the money, borrowing the money, do whatever you have to do. And unfortunately, in America today, we're borrowing way too much money to do a lot of this stuff.
Does
And
that
it's
make
put us in
sense?
debt.
What the SULAC,
Right.
so there's an agreement now that we're gonna do this, but so far they haven't put the money into that to do it. So unless that happens, it's not gonna happen.
And that's why it's important, because there was an authorization passed to what it's called twinning the lock. It's building a second large lock in place of two smaller ones that exist today. And the authorization to twin the Poe lock was first passed in 1986. I was a senior in high school, or I was a freshman in high school. So I was a freshman in high school then. And so the authorization was passed, just like the authorization that was just passed. It's a good thing that Congress has passed this authorization. It's a necessary step. The problem is that now they got to go back in the next Congress and they have to find the money to do it. Find the 922 odd million.
So in
million
'86,
dollars.
they never funded it.
After
So never got
1986,
done.
they
Okay.
never funded it.
Okay.
And then the problem is that the Army Corps of Engineers, which is responsible for these big infrastructure projects in America, because the money was never budgeted to repair the locks, they never did it. And then as a consequence, it now costs almost twice as much to do as it did in 1986. So they had to pass a new authorization because they had to authorize more money to be spent to do it.
Does that
So,
make sense,
yeah.
you guys? Do you understand that?
So my biggest concern is that right now, the U.S. government is losing a lot of revenue. Okay, the big tax cut bill really hurt what we're able to make, what the government's able to take in. And because we're seeing reductions in what we're able to take in, we're having to make really hard decisions about where we spend money. And one of there's two sides of the budget, okay? There's mandatory spending and discretionary spending.
You might want to explain what mandatory and discretionary is.
So mandatory spending means this is money that the government has pledged to spend every year, and it doesn't require congressional action, okay? And the biggest line item, that is if you think of this as a spreadsheet and everything in your budget is a line, right? The top line item is Social Security. Social Security is about $1.1 trillion every year.
And that's money that we put in our paychecks and we get it back when we get old or if we get injured or things like that. So the government kind of keeps it for us and then we get money back.
That's right. And then the discretionary spending is what Congress decides on every year. So when we say Congress is making a decision about whether to pass a budget or not, or you hear conversations about what they call a government shutdown. Well, that's because the Congress has not passed the budget they need to keep the Congress operating. And the things that are in the discretionary budget are things like infrastructure spending and the SULACs. The number one line item in America in discretionary spending is defense. It was $770 billion this year. You know, so they're making these very difficult decisions. And so my concern is that when you don't have enough money coming in and you're looking at half places to make cuts, finding that $922 billion becomes harder and harder to do. It doesn't mean you shouldn't fix it. You do need to fix it, absolutely. We all agree on that. But our priorities and how we're spending money is what this really comes down to.
And is education the discretionary?
Education is indiscretionary.
So it's like you guys, like I have a mortgage I have to pay, so my husband and I know we have to pay this mortgage, that's mandatory. Now this new car, we might want a new car, but if we don't have enough money left over after we pay our all mandatory that I don't have a choice on, we might not get the new car. See what I mean? So that's discretion. Car is discretionary, mortgage is mandatory.
And what's interesting is that all of these things affect our economies in local ways. Because in Michigan, in Michigan's 1st congressional district, about 1 in 4 people, 22%, is a Social Security beneficiary. All right, about 20% of us, so you know, the largest portion of those, are people who are getting that benefit because of their retirement age. And they get that Social Security check every month because they paid into Social Security over the course of their life. And what they're spending their money on is worth about $3.2 billion in Michigan's economy alone, in northern Michigan's economy. So those folks aren't just getting money from the government, the money's going back into our local economy because they're buying gas, they're buying food, they're paying their rent, they're buying propane to heat the house in the winter. So, that's kind of the cycle. That's one of the reasons why that $1 trillion that goes to Social Security every year really is feeding directly back into our economy.
Does that make sense? Just right, if you don't understand, you can clarify, okay, so don't be shy. This is all, you guys haven't dealt with it, you haven't even gotten this paycheck yet. But when you do, FICA is gonna take a lot of it, and that's your Social Security. Any other questions? Good, Kate.
You want to legalize marijuana, right?
I said that I personally would vote to legalize marijuana.
Okay.
So there are two parts to that. Is that is on the ballot in November, is the question of whether or not the state of Michigan should legalize marijuana. As a resident of the state of Michigan, I support that because I've seen what it means in other states in terms of regulation and taxes. Because cannabis has evolved a lot over the last half century.
Cannabis is another word for marijuana.
So, and primarily as it has been used recreationally and medicinally over the last half century, it's changed. And there are some kinds of marijuana that are more potent than other kinds of marijuana. And in different batches, it can have different impacts, which is why I think that government regulation, just like they did with tobacco and alcohol and other substances, is a good thing. It also really allows for the state to make money on it through taxation, like at the gas pump, for example. Was there a second part of your question, though?
Yeah. How would you prevent that from kids getting that?
Regulation. The same way it's hard for you, it should be hard for you to buy cigarettes, the same way it should be hard for you to buy alcohol, is you putting it in licensed dealers, just like you have to have a liquor license to sell alcohol, you would have to have a license to dispense marijuana. And there are different states that have done different things to manage it. I know, for example, in California, their marijuana dispensaries, you have to pay cash. For various reasons. So it's a very interesting thing to look at. One of the things, though, I would like to see done at the federal level, and this is where I would have a vote in Congress, is that marijuana is listed as what's called a Schedule I controlled substance, okay, legally speaking. And because of that status, and it's lumped in with narcotics and all kinds of other things that are very different from marijuana itself, but because it's a Schedule I drug, the USDA and other government agencies cannot study it. They can't look at its potential medicinal value. And I know that as a veteran, the American Legion and the VFW and many other veterans organizations have pressed the US government to allow the Veterans Administration to study the effects of marijuana and the two central chemicals, THC and CBC, because the CBC, the chemical, is one of the things in it that's not the one that gets you high, but it may have medicinal effects. And we do believe that for issues of chronic pain and post-traumatic stress disorder, that there may be some value in that. So that would be my position at the federal level, and the thing that I would have a vote on, which would be to remove it from the Schedule I drugs.
And you guys remember I told you the Schedule I has like heroin, and Schedule II has like all the opioid, the fentanyl, and the things that we talked about in our Predator and Prey last year. That's a Schedule II drug. So they say marijuana is worse than that as far as it's listed right now. Other questions?
There's a history lesson in why marijuana is a Schedule I drug, but it was marijuana and heroin were both looked at in the 1970s as a way to combat the anti-government movement.
Oh, interesting.
So they criminalized marijuana as a means to pursue action against the hippies.
That's
So what about like
School
school safety?
safety? Yeah. I know, it's a huge concern. Like I said, I got 2 kids, and I put them on the bus every day, and I expect them to come home. And I can't imagine, honestly, what it's like for you guys to be growing up in this era. I mean, what grade were you guys in when Sandy Hook happened?
What year was that? Second grade?
Second grade. Yeah, so right about the age of the kids.
Yeah.
So, something that concerns me a lot. And I also want to make sure that we don't create an environment where your school feels more like a prison the learning environment. So I think there's some things that we can do in terms of cooperating between the Department of Education, the local school districts, but really it all comes back to making sure that people who are at risk don't have access to firearms. And that's one of the principal means by which we can do that. And this is really a uniquely American problem, school shootings. And so we need to have an American solution. And in order to do that, we need both sides to be able to come together and do this. I will tell you that I was struck. I'm a gun owner. I'm a veteran. I hunt. I have 2 handguns. I have my concealed pistol license, although I don't really carry. I did that because it makes it easier to transport your handguns in a vehicle and still be in compliance with the law, and it protects public safety, police and those folks, because if you have an encounter with them, they know there might be a firearm in the vehicle, that type of thing. I think it's important. But I took the NRA's questionnaire. I don't know if you know, the NRA, National Rifle Association, sends questionnaires out to candidates, and then they publish your grade. They give you a grade. And the way that their questionnaire is laid out is they make a statement about gun rights. They don't ask a question, really. They make a statement about some specific issue as it relates to their gun rights. And then the answers you're offered are, I agree with the NRA, or I disagree with the NRA. So I disagreed with the NRA on 3 out of 20 questions. So what would you give me if I got 17 out of 20? I'd give me a B. They gave me a D. A D. So that's, they grade you A plus, B, D, F. They skip the middle ground. There's no middle ground for that.
What did Mr. Bergman get?
He's an A. He's NRA endorsed.
Yes.
And so I think that as long as you're having an organization that is trying to hold your legislators hostage, then you're going to have challenges in being able to reach agreements. Because very clearly, when you look at the NRA's rating, there's no middle ground. If I got a 17 out of 20 on their test and they rate me a D, there's obviously no middle ground.
Wouldn't you guys be mad if you got a 17 out of 20 and I gave you a D? Questions?
Yeah, that's fine.
What would you do about Michigan's health care?
So
Just a
one,
little bit.
yeah, Michigan healthcare. Are you guys familiar with what's called the Healthy Michigan Plan? You hear
No,
that
I'm pretty sure
sometimes?
not.
Okay.
I'm
So
not either.
the Healthy Michigan Plan, when the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2009,
And that's the Obamacare.
that's Obamacare. When that act was passed, it offered the states the opportunity to participate in Medicaid expansion. And we have 2 public health plans basically in America. We have Medicare, which is generally for the elderly and some with disabilities, and Medicaid, which is health care for those folks who are lower income who can't afford access to care, okay? So Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act allowed the governor of Michigan to open that plan up and bring in more than 200,000 people in Michigan who didn't have health care before, who have health care now. There's 46,000 in Michigan's 1st congressional district alone. And so if Congress were to repeal the Affordable Care Act and not have provisions to replace Medicaid expansion, then the Healthy Michigan Plan would then be unfunded. So the state of Michigan, it would pass that entire burden, that tax burden, to the state of Michigan. And they would have to make the decision about whether or not they could afford to continue the operation.
Okay, he just has time for 1 or 2 more questions, so this is your guys' last chance. All right, we'll ask one more thing. He says, what is your opinion on LGBTQ equality, especially in schools?
Yeah, I support civil equality for everyone, equality across the board. And, we have to, you look around you and you look at your friends and the people that you go to school with every single day, and I believe you should all have the fundamental same rights as human beings. So regardless of what your gender identity is, regardless of whether you identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, it's all of those things should be protected under the law. No one should be able to discriminate against you for that, not your school, not a place of business, certainly not your employer. So I think that those fundamental civil protections are something that we need to ensure are in place. I'm really concerned today with some of the things that are happening. We were talking about visas earlier. Well, one of the things the current administration has announced it will no longer do is normally if you would have a foreign diplomat who comes to the United States to serve at an embassy or a consul, they would have their partner, their spouse or their partner would come with them. And they would automatically, of course, get a diplomatic visa for their partner. Well, this administration has announced that it will no longer grant diplomatic visas to same-sex partners. So if you are a diplomat from Sweden and you're a woman and you're married to a woman in Sweden, the United States will no longer issue your wife a visa. And I tell you, I think that not only is that a fundamental violation of human rights, but it's just bad diplomacy.
And last question, and then of the many topics discussed in the debate against Bergman, what do you find the most important?
There's a lot of important stuff being discussed in that debate.
What about your final point?
I think the thing for me, the biggest issue is we have to address real equitable tax reform. You should, when you go to work and you pay a 32% tax rate, you shouldn't have a multi-billion-dollar corporation paying a 22% tax rate. If you are not afforded the same deductions and the advantages. So when you do your taxes, there's ways that the tax code affords you to reduce what we call your taxable income. So you don't pay taxes on your entire income, right? Well, there are fewer options for you as an individual to reduce your taxable income than there are to large corporations, and especially big executives. I mean, these are people who are making $300 million a year, and they're not paying the same tax as you are if you're making $23,000. And I think that inequity has to be addressed. And the best way to do that, the reason we're in the position that we are here today, is because of money in politics. When you run a campaign, you do what I've been doing for the last 19 months. You spend a lot of time raising money because you have to make advertisements and you got to pay to put them on TV. They don't do that for free. You have to, if you're going to send stuff in the mail, you got to have that stuff printed and send it out. So all that stuff costs money. And there are some political candidates, like my opponent, who take lots of corporate money. One example is he's taken almost $20,000 from Charter, Verizon, AT&T. What all those organizations have in common is they're all internet service providers. So when you have the internet at your house, your parents are paying a bill to Verizon or AT&T or Charter. Well, one of the biggest opponents to expanding broadband access is Verizon, Charter, AT&T. And the reason is they want to control that market. If we get high-speed fiber optic cable deployed around the district, then it makes it far easier for competition to come in. They don't like competition.
Things they care about is the internet. What's that thing called? Where we're going to limit
Net neutrality?
Yes.
Yeah.
Are they opposed to that?
So yeah, well, that's one of the keys is that if you are larger corporations and internet service providers are opposed to net neutrality because they want to make you pay for these different things. Like if you want basic service at your home to get access to this, this, and this. So let's say what are the top things you want access to?
Fortnite.
Yeah. So you want to be able to play a game. You want to be able to stream Netflix or Hulu. You want to be able to access your school site so you can get your homework done or turn in your homework, right? So the internet service providers, without net neutrality, can charge you for each one of those things, and they can charge you more for Netflix and less for your access to your school site, but it really takes the power of the internet away from you all. So it's big picture. When we talk about money in politics and politicians who take money from big corporations, you have to think about what that means when they go to Washington. Are they going to represent you, or are they gonna represent the corporations who've given them a lot of money? And I think that's a fundamental problem. Not saying everybody who goes to Washington and takes corporate money is bad. I just think they have the wrong priorities.
Does that make sense? All right. How